Alrighty, folks. So this is a question we get once in a while that has to do with corrective action plans, personal improvement plans for your staff and for volunteers, and how do we handle these types of things. And so we have an outlined policy on corrective action for staff and for volunteers, and you can find it on that little chip. But I thought I'd walk through that. It's essentially a four-step corrective action system. It involves personal improvement plans and write-ups and different things. But I think before I get into the details, I guess I'd just like to talk the heart of it. So none of us communicate as effectively as we may think. We think that we spell out the vision. We think that we spell out the job description and different things, but never underestimate the importance of come to Jesus moments. Like we got to sit and talk about this, man. I'm thinking something totally different than what you're thinking, and what I'm thinking is causing expectations to be set up, and they're not being met, and so you're not even knowing those expectations because you don't know what I'm thinking. And so I think the first step in this whole thing really is it is communication, and it's sitting down with people and doing verbal. And so that really is our first step in the process, is what we call a verbal warning. And so you want to talk things through with your staff globally. Of course, you can't be one-on-one with everybody. If you got 100 different people, you'd be doing that all day, like Moses. But when things happen, you want to communicate. So normally I'll call someone into the office or into a conference room, and on the verbal part, or I'll go over to their office or just walking around campus, and usually I'll just say something like this. So, what are you thinking about this? What are your thoughts on this? Where does this lie in as far as priorities go for you? And what were you thinking about this? And give them the opportunity to talk it through and to see, and then you know. So sometimes it's just a matter of like kind of figure out where they are on something. It could be that they got other completely different priorities, and they're not focused on what you want them to focus on because they're not even thinking about it. And so figuring out where they're at is, I think, the first step in this whole thing. It's too easy to jump into something and just think that people are being rebellious and that they don't want to serve and they don't want to get the job done. But I've just many times I've not found that to be true. I found it to be true that they just didn't have the same priorities in their mind as you had, and it's a matter of reshaping those priorities, helping them shift those priorities. We have this thing we try to figure out, and maybe it's an endless game, I don't know, but whenever someone is doing something wrong or not doing something they should be doing, we always try to figure out, or I always try to figure out in my heart, like, is this willful disobedience or is it woeful disobedience? And I do think there's a difference. Both are disobedience. Both are missing the mark for what your expectations are for their job. But one is willful. One is like, I know what the job is and I'm not doing it. Like, I'm just not going to do that. I don't care about it, or I disagree with it, so I'm just not going to do it. So that's a pretty easy category. That's the willful disobedience. But in cases where it's woeful disobedience, like maybe they don't have the skill set to complete the job in the way that you need it completed, and they want to do it, but they're not, and so it's still disobedience, but they're not doing it. It's kind of woeful disobedience. And another woeful disobedience is maybe they had things completely out of their control, and they're waiting on you for something, or they're waiting on someone else for something, and so they're not getting done what they should be done, or they're doing it different to try to just get it done. It's disobedience, but it's woeful. Like, they still have a heart for the ministry, they're still trying, but ultimately they're not doing what they need to do. And so in that first phase of the verbal warning, we call it phase one, I try to identify that. Where are they at mentally, emotionally, spiritually? Where are they at with the job that you're asking them to do? And then from there, it's easy to say, okay, they either have no idea what my expectations were, and that's my fault. And I have found that to be true many times. Is especially I think especially in our world, our Dream Center world, where maybe a couple people in accounting have like one job, and that's all they do, right? But like most of us at Dream Centers, we're doing a little bit of everything. Like we're just trying to survive sometimes, and you're killing it everywhere. Somebody's got to do it. So you do a little bit of everything. You're kind of the janitor some days. You're the teacher some days, teaching classes, and some days you're the graphic art person. And so I think in our world where people can do just a little bit of everything, it's really easy for people to get sidetracked. So don't ever underestimate the value of just sitting down and talking. And you as the leader, I just encourage you to not sit down and talk, but to sit down and listen, first of all. And just try to chat it up with them. Take them to coffee, see what's going on, where their head is, and then bring it back. Listen to, well, maybe, because I've had this happen before, like I really needed a person to get something done and to be focused on a certain part of the ministry. I thought I did. But when I sat down and I was talking to them and I realized all these other things they were doing that I had no idea about, I'm like, oh, like that stuff's got to happen. Like that can't stop. And so I need to change what I'm thinking needs to happen for the greater good of the organization. And so I've certainly had that talk. So I say sit down and listen and hear where they're at, and then if it makes sense, reshape their priorities and tell them, hey, I really need you to do this. I think that the agency needs this, and it's explain the value of it, and this is where we're going to go. And then if I'm not sure if that person's going to buy into it, like if it's totally different than what they think their job is, I'll maybe leave it with something like, well, it really does need to be done. I need you to think about if you feel still called to the ministry part to do this, knowing that you might have to change everything you're doing. I leave it up to you, but the fact is that it's got to get done. I'm sorry. This has to be done, and I need a leader who can take care of this. And I hope it's you. I think it's you. But if you're telling me that it's not you, then we're going to honor that, and we're going to help you move through this. So step one is that verbal kind of warning, and you don't sit there and say, hey, I'm giving you a warning. Sometimes I will. I guess I have done that sometimes, but a lot of times I'll say, hey, just a heads up, like in the future, I'm looking for this to happen. I'll be measuring success on how this is happening. Like when I look to you and your department, I'm going to look at, is this happening or not? This is going to be like how we count success for your department, and so you give that verbal sort of warning. So let's say you go 30 days, you go 90 days, maybe it gets better for a little bit, but then kind of you're back to your same spot, or maybe they come back and say, I just find someone else. This just isn't me, but I still want to do my job. I want to do my other stuff that I'm doing. We've certainly had that happen with volunteers and different folks, even with employees too. And so let's say they come back and it's still going on. So 30, 60, 90 days later, whatever the case may be, and you're coming back to them. By the way, this is all performance oriented, I understand. But if it's other areas like how their interpersonal skills are going, I'll do the same thing. So sometimes I'll have a couple department head directors who have dozens and dozens of people reporting to them, but the two directors don't get along or they squabble, and so that affects the entire team. You've seen this happen, right? So whether it's performance related or interpersonal related or sort of if they're just mean or if they're bigoted or something like that, like I do it the same. Now there are a few things that we just have to have zero tolerance for, things like embezzlement, of course, and sexual misconduct and violence, things like that. So there are certain things that you just skip to the top. You just skip to number 4, and you're like, we gotta let you go. We gotta be done with this. We have an HR attorney that's kind of an on-call person. He's not. We don't pay. We pay if he has to draw something up, but for advice and for just calling, he's been amazing for us. Maybe it's your church or maybe it's someone else, but for getting that final leg, terminating someone, you definitely want have all your ducks in a row. But we're not there yet. So level 2 then is what we consider to be the written warning. And so the written warning happens after you've already had that listening session, and you've talked it through, and you have another meeting, and you just say, okay, I usually prepare the written warning beforehand. If, like I said, I've already talked it through with them, and like, okay, we're not willful disobedience anymore. We're moving into willful disobedience. Like, this has got to change. Really got to change. And so during the written warning, then it's just a one sheet document. I don't type up all the many different instances. I'll maybe pick 2 or 3 of the top ones. You can get sample warnings in our on that little chip that we have. We've put all our warnings on there. And so in the written warning, I'm just referring back to the date when we talked about this, and saying we talked about this 3 months ago, 2 months ago, and I'm not seeing you improve. I'm not seeing this improve. I just got to let you know this is really serious, and that's what this warning is about. This is a written warning. I'm going to ask you to sign it, just knowing that I just got to know that we're clear. Like, this whole thing is really an exercise in clarity, an exercise in clear communication, very clear communication. So you start with the sit down and the listening and the talking. Then you go to, okay, now here it is in written form. You've signed it. I've signed it. We're basically agreeing that I'm asking you to do this to improve in this area, and it's noted, it's documented, it's part of your file now at the Dream Center. and you hope and you pray and you try to remove obstacles to them not becoming successful in doing that, and you move through. But let's say then 2 months later, a month later, there's still no improvement. And so what we do is we move into kind of phase 3. Phase 3 is another meeting, and at this point, I think the tendency is for your flesh is to get real riled up and say, man, what the heck, man? Like, you knucklehead, and are you just why don't you just leave, and why are you even still here? I mean, that's the flesh, that's the tendency. But I encourage you to go into that third meeting just with an absolute broken heart, and I do go in with a broken heart. It does break my heart to do this and to get to this point, and at that point, the third phase is a probationary period, and you're meeting with them saying, we talked about this 3 months ago or whenever. We sat down. We this was in writing, like what my expectations were. Here we are. You're still not doing it, or you're still, yelling at people. You haven't done the anger management that I talked about. You haven't rectified this situation. Here we are. I got to tell you, like, this is your last warning. Like, you have 30 days to turn this around. I believe you can. I believe the only thing that would make it so that you wouldn't do it is if you didn't want to do it, is if you refused to do it. I believe you have every tool, you have every purpose that if you set your mind to this, and if you don't do it within the 30 days, that's me knowing that you don't want to do it. You really don't want to do it, or it's not important to you. I've asked you if you needed my help, all this stuff. So here you are. You're at this 30-day or 60-day or whatever. Could be 2 weeks, whatever the thing is. But you put them on a probationary period, and so that's that next document. They sign it. You sign it. Sometimes they won't sign it. By the way, if they refuse to sign at any point, that's a pretty good sign that it's just not going to work out. But part of what you're doing is my HR attorney always warns me. He's like, Brian, by the time you get to putting stuff on paper, there's like a 20% chance that it's ever going to work out. He's like, if you've had the meetings, if you've talked to people, if you've listened to them, by the time they're ready for the putting it on paper, it's pretty rare that it ever works out. He said, but you still want to put it on paper, and you still want to do it, because what you're doing is you're building a foundation for if there's ever a case, like a wrongful termination lawsuit or anything. He's like, plus, it does work out for 20%. So you're trying to squeeze that last bit of hope out of the whole thing. And so there you are, and you're issuing the probationary period, saying it's got to change within these 30 days. If it doesn't, then we're going to sit down. This will probably be where we have to part ways. And so you put that out there. Now, I should say that at any of these moments, either the verbal warning, the written warning, or the probationary period. Now, some of the tools that I mentioned that you give your people to help move through this, one of the tools is a PIP, a performance improvement plan. And in the performance improvement plan, you are giving them, don't spend more than 20 hours a week doing this, and you've got to spend a minimum of 10 hours a week doing this. And so you're kind of, the performance plan is like restructuring in the nitty-gritty details. Performance plans, you can find them on our chip, are usually 5-6 pages in length. So what I'm laying out are the nuts and bolts steps to fire a person or to try to save the employee relationship. And so step 3 then is that it's that probationary period, and some people pull it back from there. Some people, that's the severity of the situation. That's the wake-up call. You at this point have gone overboard to listen, to talk to them, but when it comes to a point where people are on probation, like something clicks, and that's what all these are. These are all just steps to try to, shake people out of it or wake them out of whatever they're going through. And so you say in the write-up, again, one page, just one sheet, referencing the verbal, referencing the written, and laying out again the 2 or 3 bullet points of what your expectations are very clearly, and that over the next 30 days, if you don't see improvement, or if it happens again, whatever it is, then we're going to have to take further action up to and including termination. That's usually the way we put it, is just up to and including termination of employment services. And so let's say you go 30 days, you go 2 weeks, whatever it is, but it doesn't work out. And so then that's the 4th and the kind of final step. We've talked in another video about letting employees go and volunteers go. And I think at that point, more important than, I don't think the lawyer would agree, but more important than the details of the separation are just your heart in the matter. If you go into it screaming and raging and throwing stuff figuratively or literally, you're sowing seeds for that person to get really empowered and come back around the circle and hit you with some kind of a wrongful termination lawsuit, or to try to go to your board or your church and try to negotiate huge severance or something like that. But the qualifiers for termination ought to be pretty well outlined in your church, not the qualifiers, but the protocols. So you'll have it's different in different states, but you'll have so much time to cut them their vacation if they've got vacation. You'll have so much time to cut them their last check. We talked in another video about you want to take care of people's families, even if they've done you wrong. It is the right thing to do to consider that person has a family and they have bills. And so depending on where you're at, I mean, sometimes we'll do a month worth of severance for every year worked. Some places do 2 weeks severance for every year worked. I think those are cases where, if you have to lay someone off, because they haven't raised the money that they needed to raise for their salary and for everybody else, or if you just have a cutback, you're ending a program because a grant ended, like you want to kind of buff some of that stuff in there. But you let them go and you move forward, and you do it the right way in your heart and in their eyes as much as you can, and certainly in the eyes of God and what He's called you to do. So that's how we do our process for discipline, for corrective action. Now, the one thing that I'll add to that is either in the second layer or in the third, but certainly in the fourth. So somewhere along the way, if sometimes there'll be situations where you're like, okay, it's not working for you being over the youth anymore. Like, they don't relate to you. You get frustrated and yell at them. Nobody's been abused, but so we're still good. But sometimes you're making these interdepartment transfers, and so one of the things we've added to our paperwork of late has been, well, two things I'll talk about, but one of the things has been a restoration plan. And so if that person is going to be in your ministry, and maybe you're stepping them down for 90 days because, they posted something bad on Facebook and they were drinking a beer or something. We're pretty reserved when it comes to drugs and alcohol or anything like that. And so maybe they did that, and you just need to step them down for like 30, 60, or 90 days, and then you write into there, what's the restoration plan? Like, how do they get back into your ministry? And I think that's giving people a lot of hope. You're not just writing them off. And so there's two additional things that I'll add to this as you're weaving this through. One is to weave into the warnings a restoration plan. How are they going to be restored back into the ministry? If they're going on a suspension 30, 60, 90 days, or if they're terminated, like, when can they reapply, and how can they be restored back? It goes miles with that person, but also with, like I said, in that fortunate case that it goes to wrongful termination, or maybe they've done something egregious and you can't allow them back. It also lays the foundation for how severe it was that what they did. And so building in a restoration plan, restoring them back to the ministry, is a key component that we've used for that. Another one that we just in the recent years have woven in is John, my HR attorney, has really tried to push this idea to me of the more that they can be involved in crafting the plan for restoration or for improvement, the more they can be involved in crafting the plan, the more you can hold them accountable for as it goes. So I mentioned in step one where step two where you're doing a written warning. Sometimes at that point you're saying, okay, part of this written warning is I need to see your own performance improvement plan. I need you to come up with a plan for how you're going to get better in this area, how you're going to do this, and then I'll hold you accountable to it. I can give you a plan, but my plan may not encompass all of your workings and your schedule and things. So part of this written warning, you have to come back to me in 1 week with a plan. And if they do that, you hold them accountable to that plan. If that plan achieves what you need it to achieve, and you move forward. So those are kind of the two additional things that I would add to that. The other thing I'll say again is just it should be heartbreaking to get to these moments. I have found personally that by and large the vast majority of these situations and issues get worked out at the verbal level, and it truly was just not necessarily a miscommunication. It was that there's an abundance of work, right? And it's a structuring of the priorities of that work, because the people we have in our ministry that work for us, and honestly the people that we want in the ministry, we're all geared to serve. Like we're servants. Like we're looking for hurts and healing in them, and everybody manages that differently, and everybody is coming to you and working for you. They have their own personal, unique sense of calling, and maybe they're in that, but maybe they're in the position they're in because that's the one you can pay them for. You're paying them to be operations, but really they're called to be a pastor, and they're trying to do it the best they can. But they're ministering to people all day long when they should be, like fixing the building and doing projects and stuff. But you got to balance that whole thing. You needing to see this as a ministering moment to your people, and showing them that we all have these gifts and these callings, but always within those gifts and calling are we gotta do what we gotta do, and the ministry calls, the Lord calls us to do things, and so does the ministry. The ministry calls us to do things. I hope this has been helpful for you guys. Again, get that plan. We're not saying it's perfect, but it's worked pretty well for us over the last 12, 15 years.